Good morning. Okay.
Morning, Rabbi.
I can hear you. Let's see if this works well.
Good morning, good morning.
It's very low. Is it me or is it you?
Earpiece.
Earpiece. Okay, good. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning PESACHIM Daf Nun Vav. We concluded yesterday's shiur learning the Mishnah and Daf Nun Heyam and Beis, and on top of Nun Vav, the Shisha Devarim that the Anshe Yericho did, and Al Shloisha Michu B'Yadam, and Al Shloisha Loi Michu B'Yadam. And as we will clarify today, Loi Michu B'Yadam doesn't mean that what they did was fantastic. It just means that even though it was objectionable, but for three things they did not protest. Today we're going to start with the Braisa, learning about 6 things that Chizkiyahu HaMelech did. But over here, 3 of those things actually hoiduloi, Zajac, that's the name Chizkiyahu. And for another 3 things, loy hoiduloi. We're going to be going through the 6 items in detail of the Anshe Yericho in the Gemara today. We're going to have the Talmudic source for Baruch Shem. Where does Baruch Shem come from? According to the Gemara, why is it that we say it quietly? A lot more nuances about the Anshe Yericho. We're going to be learning about the fruits that fall off the trees on Shabbos, exactly what the issue was. And God willing, if we'll have enough time, we'll already start getting into the basic rules of what is machayev products, produce, for it to be payad, and what type of plantations, what type of growths are not obligated in them having payah separated from it, and a lot more. Chavra, let us start on Daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph. We are second line from the top of the Amid, in the beginning of the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan. Baruch atah Adino Eloheinu Malachenu B'shar Kol Yom V'Doim. Says the Gemara Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in a Braisa that Shisha Devarim Asa Chizkiyahu HaMelech, that there were 6 things that were done by Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Actually, it says Chizkiyahu. Many say that his name Chizkiyahu was because of these 6. They added an extra vav, so now you have 6 letters in his name. Zajac is the hoiduloi. They told him Zajac, and on the other 3, Yihiyu Zolzain, but loy hoiduloi. Al shloish hoiduloi, they agreed with 3. Al shloish loy hoiduloi. What is important, just to point out, is that on the 3 that loy hoiduloi, there was never a michubai. And as we will see, that all of the occurrences for which loy hoiduloi were one-time occurrences. So he did it once. So there was no need to make a macha. Unlike the 3 that we're going to go back to with details in the Mishnah of Anshe Yericho, since they were practices that were ongoing, since the Chachamim were not hoidul, so they felt that also you have to be moicha as well. Okay, so let's go. Gired atzmais avaval mitel shel chavalim. Chizkiyahu's father, Melech Achaz, who was a Rasha meaning not only was he an Oved Avodah Zarah, but sadly he enticed others to do so as well. So Chizkiyahu, to make sure that people understand the detriment of Avodah Zarah, so when his father passed away, he dragged the bones of his father on a bed of ropes. In other words, he led him towards his burial in a very degrading way. And the Chachamim agreed with that. That was the right thing to do. Number 2 is Kites Nachash Hanachoshes. We have in Parshas Chukas the story of when the people at a certain point who spoke very negatively, Moshe Rabbeinu was told by Hashem to make this copper serpent and to lift it up on high. And people that were being bit by serpents were told that if they're going to look up at the serpent, they're going to live. And as Chazal tell us, that it's not the serpent that gave life, but it was their looking up, ultimately understanding that everything is coming from Hashem. That is what brought them back to life. And that Nachash Nechoshes, that copper serpent, was in our possession. Came a time that people started to venerate it, to the point that people began to attribute some sort of divinity into the Nachash Nechoshes. And Chizkiyahu, again, to go min hakotza el hakotza, to be misaken, the idol worship that was sadly introduced by his father, he went ahead and he crushed the Nachash Nechoshes. We have a cloud that Maisa Moshe Nitzchiyim Heim. Nitzchiyim Heim, but he went ahead and he crushed it. And V'hoiduloi. People did not do it before him, because before him no one was venerating the Nachash Nechoshes in a wrongful way. And number 3 is Gana Sefer Refuos V'hoiduloi. So we have a sefer called Sefer HaRefuos. Many say that Shlomo HaMelech was the one that wrote it. In that sefer, a person would have a remedy to every illness in the world, and not only would they have a remedy, but the person would get healed very quickly. So when it came to the times of Chizkiyahu HaMelech, like Rashi says, at the end of the wide lines of Rashi, on top of the Gemara, that the Gana Sefer HaRefuos, K'dechsiv, that the Hatoiv Be'einecha Asisi. And what does that refer to? That since people were not being humbled by illness, because they felt almighty, for everything there's a solution. So he felt that it's detrimental to have it, and he hid it. Now the question is, if we have to, so to say, rely directly on God, and we have to be humbled when we're ill, why did Shlomo HaMelech write that book? Is the Chadaya that we're supposed to work within Derech HaTeva. So he wrote a book how to get healing. So why did Chizkiyahu HaMelech hide it? So one of the Gavaldic approaches is that the Sefer HaRefuos was based on the understanding of the koichos of the mazolos, and being that we're not supposed to behave aligning ourselves to the mazolos, because ein mazal Yisrael, lechatchila Shlomo HaMelech never wrote the sefer for us to practice the refuos, but it was a sefer of chachma, for us to be aware of this wisdom, of this knowledge, of this energy in the world. But when it came a time that people actually started to practice, that is when he went ahead and he hid it. So these are the 3. Now, number 1, kitzeitz, dal shoy shel heichal, that when Sancheiriv invaded Yehuda, and he felt, Chizkiyahu, that if he were to bribe Melech Ashur, which is Sancheiriv, he's going to retreat from Yehuda, but we did not have then enough money to bribe him, so he took off the gold from one of the doors in the Heichal. That is how he acquired the money, and he used that to bribe Melech Ashur. And on that, v'loi hoiduloi. Now, why v'loi hoiduloi? So v'loi hoiduloi, because he should have relied, so to say, that God is going to help. And here you find a Gavaldic insight. This is the struggle that we all have to have. How much do we rely on Hashem? And of course, we always rely on Hashem. But when do we say that I have to make my effort? So when he went ahead and he said that you have to hide the Sefer HaRefuos, not with the last thing that we explained, because it was not allowed to be practiced. The Pashat Pshat is that because, like Rashi says over here, that he wanted people to turn directly to God. So they told him, if you feel that the behavior of a Yid should be that very little effort, turn to God. If you're ill, turn to God. So if Melech Ashur invades Yehuda, turn to God. Oh, here you went ahead and you made an effort. So they says, no, be consistent. If you hide the Sefer HaRefuos, then you should have more Amunah and B'tachin and just use that as the tool of getting rid of Melech Ashur. The other thing is that also part of him not wanting for the invading troops to be able to properly settle in the land. Now, water is a resource that we all need. So you have the Mei Gichain, which was needed for Yerushalayim. Chizkiyahu, with his wisdom, understood how to stop up the opening of Mei Gichain, and therefore the supply of water that an invading troop would use if they were to make a siege around Yerushalayim, they no longer had. And again, v'loi hoidoloi. And here Rashi writes explicitly that he should have relied on God. But he did something which made sense. But again, they told Chizkiyahu HaMelech, you're hiding the Sefer HaRefuos. You want people to rely directly on God. So should you. And the third thing was that the Iber Nisan B'Nisan V'loi Hoydoloi. Hashgacha Pratis, we're learning this now at the end of Tevis, Tavshin Pei Aleph. We are learning those who learn Perek Echad L'Yom. We're learning now the Rambam Kiddush HaChodesh. So we're learning through all these pratim. And the Ibur Shana, that is a decision that's made by the Sanhedrin on a yearly basis, aside of them knowing the Cheshbon, and then knowing that in every machzor of 19 years, you should have 7 Ibur years. But it was a year-by-year decision. And until when can you make that decision? Only until the end of the year, because the Chodesh that we add is the month of Adar. Until when can you add the month of Adar? Until the 29th of Adar. Once it's the 30th of Adar, even before they declared it Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Chizkiyahu HaMelech knew that once you declare a date Rosh Chodesh Nisan, then you can't add an extra Chodesh. But it was not yet declared Rosh Chodesh. So Chizkiyahu HaMelech felt, since it's still Adar, without the declaration of Rosh Chodesh, it's still 30. It's 30th of the month. You can be Ma'aber Deshana in Adar. But we have a tradition that even though it was not yet declared Rosh Chodesh, since you already entered the day that could be declared Rosh Chodesh Nisan, you may not be Ma'aber the year over there. Another detail we just learned a few days ago in the Rambam, Perek Dalet, Perek Kei, that a melech cannot be involved in the Ibur Shana and a Chanami. The melech himself, Chizkiyahu HaMelech, was not directly involved, but he could have stopped it from happening. And even though, again, he did it for good reasons, he did it because when he became a king, he wanted more time. He was getting rid of Avodah Zarah. He was reintroducing the dinim of Tum and Tara. He convinced the Chachamim that in order for more people to be able to bring the Korban Pesach B'Tara, add another month. But this is what he forgot, that even though, again, it wasn't declared Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it was already considered the potential Chodesh Nisan, and you can't be Ma'aber Deshana anymore. Okay. And again, that's the Chizkiyahu. Chazak, Yihiyu. Now we're coming back to the Mishnah. So by the Anshe Yerichai, so one of the things that they did, right, and Shaloi Michu B'Yadam, Loi Michu, as we said, it was objectionable, but they didn't protest against it. He said, even though we learned in the beginning of our Perek, Koydem Kol, in many places there was a minig, B'chlal not to do Malacha Erev Pesach. And even in places where the minig was that people allowed the oilam to get involved in their own business until midnight, only until midday. But after Chatzos, you may not do any work if it's not for Tzorech Yom Tov, right? You can't do your own business. Nevertheless, they were markiv the kol and kol hayoim, that they would graft date palm trees. So first of all, what type of grafting did they do? Obviously, there's a certain level of malacha that they would not do it themselves. But they considered it relatively very little work. Umitzat sheni, as we'll explain, they consider that if they will not do it, there's going to be a hefsid. So just like Lamashal on Chol HaMoed, for hefsid meruba, that's one of the big atadim for which you can work. And as we learned yesterday, that Erev Pesach, and this goes even after Chatzos, is less restrictive than Chol HaMoed. So they felt you could do it. Now the Chachamim did not agree, but they did not make a macha. So first of all, what is it that they did? So Amar Rav Yehuda, we're learning a little bit about grafting. That Maisi Asadara, they took a fresh hadas. And the Shichra, the Daphna, they took juice that comes from the berries of a laurel tree. And the Kimcha Dasari, and they took flour from barley, but it was relatively freshly ground, meaning that it was laying in a keli, that 40 days did not yet pass. In other words, it was less than 40 days from when it was ground. It was fresh barley, and they took these 3 items, and they would boil it together. And now, they would inject it in the heart of the palm tree. And that would be machazek, that tree. And it made that tree so strong, like giving the tree steroids, that now it had a lot more power to suck nourishment out of the ground. And not only that, it took so much nourishment out of the ground that that all the other trees that was within 4 amas of the one that you treated, if you wouldn't also give an injection to it, it would wither away. Because now this strengthened tree would, so to say, eat up all the good nourishment. There would be nothing left for the other trees around it. Now the other trees would get a shot, they would get the vaccine, they would get koyach, and they would also be able to take the same amount of nourishment. Anyway, that's one shita of what they did. Now, injecting a tree with this medicine is not a big avodah. Nevertheless, the other Yidden felt, the Chachamim felt that that's not something you should do. But they felt that's something that you could do. Again, not only in the first half of the day, that's not a kasha, because then they can just say it's a makim shunahagu, laso ismalacha, but that is something that they did all the way up until the Yom Tov began. No, what they did was they did something a little bit more laborious. Manche kufra dichra, they would insert a male branch, linukvasa, into a female branch. Rashi gives two explanations what that means. He speaks about the female branch is a part of the tree. Interestingly, by trees, the male is the one that gives fruit. The female is the one that does not give a fruit. And if they would take a male branch, right, and they would stick it, they would make a slit in a female tree and they would insert it in it, that's pasha to graft, then off the male branch, dates would grow. In other words, and they felt that this is in the category of David Ha'aved, and therefore, Chalamoyed, you can do it, you can avada do it out of Pesach, and the Chachamim disagreed with all that. Okay, the second thing the second thing the Mishnah mentioned, again, this is from the three that was objectionable, but was that they wrapped was, and now we're going to learn the different understanding. Says the Gemara that Heichi Yavdi, what did they do? Amar Rav Yehuda. They would say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and V'lo Hoyo Mafsikim, and they would not stop, they would not pause. According to Rashi over here, they would not pause between the word Echad and what comes afterwards. Why are you supposed to pause? Because you're supposed to be misbainen on the Hashem Echad. And that's the time when you're going to be Mekabel Oil Malchus Shemayim, that there's one God in the 7 heavens and the earth and the Dalad Ruchais, and they went straight to what it said afterwards. So explains Rashi. Tosfos, the little Tosfos here, the only Tosfos on the Amud says no. That what they did is, excuse me, you're supposed to say Shema Yisrael, pause, because you're speaking to yourself. Listen, Yid, what Hashem Elokeinu. They did not put a comma between, that's so says Tosfos. They did not put a comma between the Yisrael and Hashem. So therefore, it almost sounded like they're not telling themselves to be shoymeya, but they're asking the Eibishter to listen. In other words, they read it in a way where the meaning changed. Look inside the Tosfos. Lo hayam mafsikim bin Shema Yisrael l'shem, to Hashem's name. The mashma, the oimer l'shem, it sounded like they're telling that Hashem should listen to the Yidden. And it's not a tefillah. Shema Yisrael is a declaration of the basics of our emunah, that Hashem is echad. So that's Rashi Tosfos. That's just in the first understanding. Let's go weiter. Rava says, no, mafsikin hayu. In the Shema Yisrael, everything was fine. Elo shoyo imrim, that in the first parsha, there is a place where you're supposed to put a comma, and that is Asher Aleichem Etzavcha Hayoim, comma, that were on Asher Aleichem Etzavcha Hayoim should be Al Levavecha, but they didn't put the comma there. They would say Hayoim Al Levavecha. And what happens when you don't take a pause? What does that sound like? The mashma Hayoim Al Levavecha, today Al Levavecha, but V'lo Machad Al Levavecha. So again, that's something that they were not happy with it, but V'lo Michu. Tanach Rabbanan. Now we're going to have, this is more famous. Says the Gemara, recording here at Tosefta, that what exactly did they do? What does it mean? They would rap. They would not pause. They would go. That oimrim, they would say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So again, the first shita is what we just learned. V'lo mafsikim, Divrei Rav Meir, Rashi. They didn't stop. They were not misbainin enough by the Echad. Tosfos, they didn't put a comma between Shema Yisrael, comma Hashem Elokeinu. They said Shema Yisrael Hashem. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer mafsikin hoyu elo shlo yoimrim baruch shem kaved malchus elolam voed. They said the Shema the way we say it. They say V'ahavta the way they say it. They did not insert baruch shem. Now hold on. Look inside Parshas Vo'eschanan. In the Chumash, there's no baruch shem. So asks the Tosefta, "Va'anan my tamo meninalei." I'm sorry, this is the Gemara. "Va'anan my tamo meninalei," answers the Gemara. When it says in Parshas Vayechi that Vayikra Yaakov el Banav and Vayomer, and he tells his children, "Hey, us who gather, Va'agidu lachem," and I will tell you. What was he going to tell them, right? Bikesh Yaakov legalis lebanav kates hayamin. He was going to tell Yaakov the right, the positive end, the end of suffering, the coming of Mashiach. And he wondered, why is it that the Shekhinah departed from him? So he said to himself, Amar Shemach Chas v'Shalom Yesh b'mitasi psul, which is why the Shekhinah does not allow me to share with them that information. And why? And furthermore, why would he think that there's some defect from his family? Because just like Avram, Yishmael, and Avi Yitzchak, what happened? Esav. So maybe for me, one of my children is toiknished. So Amru Lai Banav. So when his children sensed that fear, they told him, Tate Shema Yisrael. Here Yisrael is referring to him. No, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Which means that Amru, they told him, Kishein She'ein B'libcha Ela Echad, that in your heart you know there's only one God. Kach Ein B'libeinu Ela Echad. So the Shema Yisrael was said by the Shvatim, and Ba'oisa Shah, when he heard that declaration, Pasach Yaakov Avinu Ba'amar, he responded, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusei La'olam Vod. My friends, Yehei Shlama Rabba Mavarach La'olam Al'omi Almayam is Aramish for Baruch Shem. Now that we had that interchange between the Shvatim and maybe the Einiklach and Yaakov, so now Amri Rabban and Heichi Navet. So now we have a dilemma, a great dilemma, which is name Ruhu. Should we say it whenever we recite the Shema? How can we recite Baruch Shem? Taka Yaakov Avinu said it, but Lo Yamru Moshe Rabbeinu. In the Torah we don't have that. Why name Ruhu? So should we not say it? Should we read the Shema the way it's written in the Chumash? How can we do that? Amru Yaakov, but Yaakov said it. So what are we supposed to do? So what did they do? So they said, we'll make a compromise. Say it, but say it silently. That's all us. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Devei Rav Ami, Mashal Bas Melach. He gave a mashal to this, that there was a princess. She smelled the aroma of the stew of a seasoned pot. In other words, she smelled something very tasty, and she developed a craving for it. She had a taiva for something. Problem is that Im Toimar, she said to herself that what the princess, I'm going to go tell my chevra, I want to have that type of tzike kedera dignity to start going after that craving, then she's going to have tsar. So what happens? So the avadim, they realized that she is not articulating what she wants, but she wants it. So ischilu avodeha lahavi bechashoy. We desire, what's our desire is to follow in Yaakov's footsteps. But there's a certain uncomfortability. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say it. So we don't avoid it. We do it bechashoy. That's the mush. However, Amar Rabbo, that I want you to know that iskinu sheyiu that there came a time in certain locations where they told people, Dafke, read it out loud. Why? Like Rashi writes 2 lines under the Gemara, that when you had the early Christians, that means we're talking now in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, towards the end, or in the beginning of the times of the Gemara, and people, or some in the beginning of the times of the Gemara, people began to believe in Oisa Ha'ish, and there was a fear that someone is saying Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and then he would say some sort of statement acknowledging an Avodah Zarah, because he's saying it quietly. So then at that when there were suspicions that people were Nebuch falling into Narash ideas, is you're saying Baruch Shem Kavei Malchus Eloheinu. What? However, you need a reason to say it loud. But Uben Nahardo, since the Lekaminim, Ad Hashda, until today, the Gemara says, no minim ever made it to Narda, Nish Bayuns. So we keep on saying it silently. Now, by the way, this is a great insight as to why do we say Baruch Shem b'Koil Ram on Yom Kippur. Now we all know there are other reasons for it. There's Midrashim that say that when Moshe Rabbeinu went above, that's a Midrash we have in Shabbos and in the Sugya of Matan Torah, and he heard the Malachim saying Baruch Shem, and he took that statement from them. But we are afraid that the Malachim should not have tinus, that who are we? We took their prayer. So on a day that we are like angels, which is on Yom Kippur, then we can say it. The reason that we have in the Midrash explains why we are allowed to say it on Yom Kippur. According to the Talmud Bavli, if the reason why we're supposed to say it b'chashoy is because, so to say, it's not nice for Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say it. So what happens Yom Kippur? On Yom Kippur, we're not worried about Moshe Rabbeinu's feelings. So they catch, that's the Gemara over here. That since on Yom Kippur, who comes to Shul Yom Kippur? We're mispalel imho avaryanim. On Yom Kippur, everyone comes to Shul. And Yidden, sadly, from Galus, some of them fell into Narish ideas. So just like Rabbi Bo says that in his region, because for no one to suspect what exactly are you saying during the Shema, you got to say it loud, since, a Yid, the Rebbe says the beauty of a Yid, that no matter how far a Yid is, on Yom Kippur he goes to Shul. But you don't know what this Yid is into. So we say Baruch Shem Kaved Malchus Eloheinu loud, like Rabbi Bo. That was Gavaldik. Now there's a lot of nigla over here, but Baruch Hashem, we are lucky we're Hasidim. So at least we, just to share what we have al pi Hasidus. And that is that the Alter Rebbe explains, Shema Yisrael Zichud Ilah. When a person reaches, and that's the hefsek, that's the hisboinanus, that we have to experience how there's nothing, einoid. But on the other hand, there is a world. There's Yichud Tata. Yichud Tata is coming from us being on a lower level. That's why we say it b'chashoy. We're not proud of the fact that we're not shaykh to live in Yichud Ilah. Anshe Yerichoi, they did not say Yichud Tata because they lived in Yichud Ilah. The Anshe Yerichoi were Yidden. For them, there was taka no world. They experienced Hashem Echad. Another very important Hasidic insight, and that's the Yechidus with the Alter Rebbe. I forgot which tzaddik, that someone entered the Alter Rebbe, and he asked the Alter Rebbe that how is it possible after a Yid says Hashem Echad means that there is nothing. There's only God. If there's only God, then how can we say ve'ahavta? How can you say you love God if there's no me to love God? Because Hashem Echad, to whom is God commanding that we should love Him? In other words, you need to have a Baruch Shem Kived Malchus Eloheinu Vod in order for you to be able to get to the ve'ahavta. That's another insight in the Mafsikin, going back to the beginning, especially Shitas Rashi v'Rab Meir. In other words, the Mafsikin, al pi Chasidus, is not to be misboinin more in Hashem Echad. Faket is for you to come down that level. Because if you experience Hashem Echad, then you don't exist, I don't exist, and then to whom is God commanding? Who is loving God? It's just God. Let's go weiter. Tanach Rabbanan, we learned in a Brais. More details about these 6 items of Anshe Yerichai. Shisha Doram Asu Anshe Yerichai, Shloisha B'Ritzoyin Chachamim. This is different than our Mishnah. Our Mishnah, like we said, none of the 6 they were happy with. Elama, on 3 they did not object. They did not make a macha. They did not make a macha, but they objected. They weren't happy. Here the nusach is 3 was fine. 3 was beratzin. Ushloisha shalom beratzin chachamim. Ve'elu beratzin chachamim. Markiv the kolam kolayoyim beratzin. They were fine with it. You can graft trees the whole out of Pesach, the way we learned the 2 opinions above. And they were happy that the people on the level in Yerichai, Moirech v'doin, on that madrega, there's no Yehuda Tata. And and they were okay with them reaping the produce, like we explained, produce that is ra'ui to go on the mizbeach for the omer. Indeed, reishis ketzirchem, it may not be reaped before the omer is brought, but produce that grows in the valley or any other inferior produce, there is no prohibition to reap it. On the other hand, we don't want people to erroneously eat it by mistake. But on the other hand, like we spoke out, other than the esrik, when something is ripe and ready, if you're going to take it, matured. So they were fine with them reaping Problem was with Yericho, not only did they reap it, but they piled it. That was the issue. That's not like we have in our Mishnah. And the Elush Levirotzen Chachamim, that after they were koitzer, goitchen as oimer. Ooh. Now once it's heaped, now it's even closer for a person to accidentally eat it. Number two is uparts and paratzes begin saying that they would make breaches in the fences that were surrounding their gardens, ubepardis and the fences that were surrounding their orchards. Why would they open up? Why would they open up the gates or make breaches in the gates? Lahachel neshed, in order to allow for the fruit that falls naturally on Shabbos for it to be available la'aniyim, and that is particularly true b'shnei batzoides, in years of famine. They mamish meant well on Shabbos and on Yontif, but that was something, as we'll see now, we'll go into details. They were not happy. It was shalai beratzin. And and they had trees, either carob trees, buxter trees, or sycamore trees, and they were magdis, the trees, as we explained yesterday when we learned the Mishnah. Anything that was part of the tree during their declaration of Hegdish is Hegdish, Bedek Habayis. They would never use it. But then the branches grew. So that additional growth that came from a tree of Hegdish, but they were not magdish it. It's growth of Hegdish. They felt that that's something that they are allowed to derive benefit from. And whenever they pruned the trees, they used those branches, those gamziois, for their personal use. And that the Chachamim were against. So Rabbi Yehuda, I disagree with everything that you're saying. Because your version is that the three things was beratzain. It was mamish fine. Yeah, if it's mamish fine, why don't we do it? Is you call Adam Oisim Cain? Now, by the way, the answer, at least for the Korech and Shema, that we have on Chassidus, that they were on a level in which they did not come down to this world. They lived in Atzilus. They had no Yehuda Tata. They lived in Yehuda Elah. But not everyone can live on that level. But that will be Shitas Rabbi Meir. But Rabbi Yehuda says, if it's Beratz and Chachamim, to let everyone do it. Elot must be the way we have in our Mishnah. None of what they did was accepted. There's a difference. It's not black and white. You can not be content with something. You can object to something, but you don't have to make a protest. Three, they made a protest against. The Elu Shaloi Michu B'Yadam. Bited in this brisa, it's just more elaborate than the Mishnah, that Markiv the Kolam Kolayoim, this is the same one we have in our Mishnah. Number two is V'koich and Hashema. Number three, V'koitzin, but V'goitzin. Now we got a problem because V'goitzin is four. The Gemara is going to amend it in Namad Beis. Lifnei Yoimer, the Elu Shemichu B'Yadam. What were they? Not only did they object, but they made a protest. Is Matirin Gamzir Shal Hegdish Shal Charuv Shal Shikma. They were mated. They used those pieces of branches that was pruned off, but the Chachamim says no. Me'ilah. Points and Paratzes begin to say apart the sayim that they would make breaches in their fences around their gardens and orchards in order lahachil neshid la'aniyim on Shabbos and Yomim Tovim during a famine. Sounds beautiful, but it's not allowed. And that they would leave payah of vegetables. And like we explained, there's nothing wrong giving an ani a gift. But if you call the gift payah, an ani knows that payah doesn't have to be tithed. But if that is really not mechuyev to be paid, so you're giving a gift of something that was not, no trumas or maasros were taken off. So a takala will come out. They're going to eat it without tithing it. So they made a protest because yerek doesn't have to be, you don't have to leave payah from yerek. Now, obviously, for every single one, we'll have to explain what they held. Says the Gemara, hold on. The Savar Rabbi Yehuda that just the Ketzira or Shaloi Beratz and Chachamim. How can Rabbi Yehuda be of that opinion? When V'Hatnan we have a Mishnah in Menachos that Anshe Yerichai Koitzrim Lifnei Ha'omer Beratzain Chachamim. Now we're going to prove in a moment that this Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Yehuda, but the Mishnah writes that Anshe Yerichai, when they would harvest their produce before the Omer, that was fine. That was Beratzin. Elama, the Goitchen Lifnei Omer Shal Beratzin Chachamim. But even though it was Shaloi Beratzain, V'loi Michu B'yadam Chachamim. End of Mishnah in Menachos. Now Daf Nun Vav Amid Beis. So says the Gemara, who's the author of this Mishnah? Man Shamat Lei de Amar Michu V'loi Michu. Don't forget that we had an Amad Aleph in the Braisa. Rav Meir's version was Beratzain or Shaloi Beratzain. Rav Meir never used the verbiage of Michu. So who Bechlal has the version of when we heard about what Anshe Yerichai are doing? It was a question of whether we're going to make a machar or not. It's Rabbi Yehuda. In andere Werte, the author of the Mishnah Menachos is Rabbi Yehuda. Yet, when it comes to Ketzira, the Mishnah says explicitly that Koitzrim Meratzen Chachamim. To which the Gemara answers the way Rashi says, Ulitaymech is an answer. Hold on. Go read the Braisa. The Braisa speaks about 3, but the Braisa enumerates 4, like Rashi says, that Markivin, V'korchin, V'koitzrin, V'goitchin. No. Ulatamei Chane Arba. Is the Charaya, again, many Braisas were not completely authoritative. It got corrupted. You have to amend the Braisa. To begin with, you have to Sami Mikan Ketzira. So now there's no Kasha. Take out Ketzira. Yeah, what were they against? The Gedisha. We explained. Heaping koitzer is fine because if you're not going to harvest it, then it's going to get ruined. But the moment you harvest it, you saved it from getting ruined. So why are you heaping it? When the omer was not brought yet, and now when a person sees a ready-made pile, they erroneously, accidentally, they might come to eat it. Gewaldig. Continuing, my friends, 4 lines from the top of the Amid. Now this is already, we're going into the items that Ve'elu shemichu biyadam. Now we have to explain why they did what they did. That umatirin gam ziyois shel hegdish. They allowed commoners to use branches that were pruned off hegdish trees, and we're speaking about chashuva branches from a charuf tree, from a boxer tree, the shel shikma from a sycamore tree. So Amru, why did they use it for personal use? Because they said, when our forefathers were magdish those trees, lebedek habayis, at that point, there were only the trunk. No, to make it clear, when a person declares on his or her tree, this tree is for the bedek habayis, everything on that tree belongs to the bedek habayis, and if you use it, you're taking from hegdish property. The case was is that when they were magdish it, like I said, the tree was 5 feet tall. And these trees continuously grow and they have to be pruned. What did they use for their personal use is that additional growth. What our fathers were magdish were the trunks. So now the Chachamim not only did not approve of it, but they made a machah. So what is the machloikis? Says the Gemara. The machloikis is a larger machloikis. It's exactly this. When something belongs to Hekdesh, and from it something grows. No one was berachel bitchaktana magdish that. Is it imbued with Hekdesh or not? That visavre, the Anshe Yerichai hold, Commander Amar, ein me'ila b'gedulin. And the Rabbanan agree with that. Ein achanami, me'ila leka. But still, for you to use it, nazoisloi, isura miha ikum. I heard a gavaldik word. That what would be the logic to say that the Gedulim is not Hegdish? Why? And you see, L'kul Ha'am, it's not Hegdish. Because Hegdish is something that was once Chulin, and you're Magdish it. The branches that grows out of a Hegdish tree, from its very inception, it was always Mugdash. So you would think it's even holier, Pum Fakert. It's like the Baal Tshuva was greater than the Tzaddik. If something can be choil and it can be hegdish and you're magdish it, that's hegdish. If something was not shayich to choil, then you know what? The holiness is not that holy. A beautiful word. Okay, aparts and paratzis. The next thing is that they were kind, that they opened up breaches in their fences because the fruit that fell off the trees on Shabbos, they wanted the poor people, there's a famine, they should be able to take it. And the chachamim were moicha. So explains the Gemara, Amar Ula, Amar Abshua ben Lakish, Machloikis b'shpel machbeida is that the machloikis between Anshe Yerichai and the Chachamim was only regarding the dates that come from the brooms. What brooms? So on a palm tree, the branches, the upper branches, which is the branches that people use to make brooms, they're called the machbeidos. And then you have the lower branches. The argument was only regarding the machbeidos, that the dates that came from the upper part of the tree, the Chachamim felt those dates may not be consumed, even though they fell by themselves, because the Rabbanan Sabri Gozrin and Shema Yalav Yitloish, because to get to that, if you're going to reap it yourself, which is a malacha d'oraisa, you'll have to mamash climb up the tree. You'll have to pluck it down. So that is something, because of the Gzeida, even if it fell on its own, you may not benefit from it on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. However, no, we're not afraid like Gazrin and Shema Yalav Yitlish. However, Abel, Bishel, Bein, Hakipin, which are words we just had above when we were comparing the Kipin and even the lower Koitzim. We're going to the top, Machbeidois, Kipin. Kipin is the normal branches. Divrei Hakol Muter. Divrei Hakol Muter. Interesting. That is the Shita of Ula in the name of Reish Lakish. So, oh, Marle, what does the Bach say? Rabba. Here in the Gemara it says, Rabba, what are you talking about? Don't tell me that the only issue is whether we are afraid that people might climb up the tree and pluck it off the tree. There's another issue. And what's that issue? Let's go back to our beautiful muksa. Why is it muksa? Because since it was connected to the tree when Shabbos came in. So it's not muchand. Because since we are not allowed to take it off the tree on Shabbos, when Bein Hashmashas came in, it wasn't muchand. If it's not muchand, it's muksa. So how can you eat it? And the chitema, no, it's not muksa, because hoyel the chazi lo oirvin, even though, yeah, we're keeping Shabbos, no one is going to pluck it off the tree on Shabbos. It was never muchand for people to eat it, for human consumption, but the ravens, here in LA, the squirrels, they eat the stuff on the trees. And you know that. So it's muchen to be consumed. So it's not muksa. No, says the Gemara, that's not true. Because hashta muchen lo adam, lo have a muchen le klavim. We don't say that if it's muchen, if we're speaking about the human and the animal kingdoms. Muchen for in this direction, muchen lo adam is not muchen le klavim. And how do I know that, guys? Let's chazer back. Let's go back to Masechta Shabbos. As we have a Mishnah in Shabbos, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, that if you have an animal that became an avela on Shabbos and you want to cut it up and feed it to the dogs, muksa. That im lo yehoyin avela ma'erev Shabbos, you cannot cut it up. It's muksa. Why? Lefisha einam min hamuchen. Now hold on. What are you talking about? In other words, that's remember Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda has a more stringent application of muksa. For something to be allowed, for something not to be muksa, it has to be directly muchan. It has to be designated for use. So since this animal was not muchan for feeding it to the dogs, I don't care if it was designated for other usage. It's going to remain muksa. So muchan la adam is not muchan la klavim. So the other way around for sure is going to still be muksa. Muchan la arvin, which is how you might view fruits that are on your trees. You know that the wild ravens will eat it. Have a muchan la adam bit me? Of course not. So that's the kasha. It's how can you tell me the issue is a gzeira l'chayretz muksa? So amalei that in no. We don't compare one direction to the other direction. Muchan la adam, as you have a Mishnah in Shabbos, and that shittas Rabbi Yehuda, lo have a muchan la klavim. And you know why is that? Because ideally everything is designated for human use. The chol midi the chazila inish lo matzalei midaite. So muchan la arvin have a muchan la adam. But on the other way, if something is muchan la'arvim, it's also muchan la'adam. No, you know that if something will fall by itself, you don't want the oirev to eat it. Ideally, you want to use your produce for human consumption. So it's not only is it muchan la'arvim, but you already had in your mind that if it's going to fall off the tree, I'm going to be able to take it. So there is no muksa issue. Now there's a gzeda, you might go up the tree and take it off yourself. That we get. But it's not muksa because the chol mida the chazal inish date ilave says the Gemara Kiyasur Rav and Amar Shem Lakish that unlike we had above machlokes between the Chachamim and Anshe Yerichai was bishel bein akipin adarabah was from the dates that came from the lower branches, not from the higher branches. The Rabbanan are the ones, and that's Taka the Machlokes, they hold that since it was on the tree when Shabbos came in, as far as you knew, it won't fall off. Maybe it was Muchan for ravens, but it's Muktzah for people. Muchan la'arvin la'avim, Muchan la'adam. So it's Muktzah. The Anshe Yerichai hold that if something is fit to be used even only for animals, in the back of your mind you say, I hope I'll be able to eat it. Muchan la'arvim, have a Muchan la'adam. But if dates fell off the higher branches, divrei hakel asur, because everyone will subscribe that there's a gzeira shemayala v'yitloish. I just want to point out that according to the latter Ravin, it's amazing. Everyone is calling it a shlakish, but they have a machlokes what the shlakish says. I'm just curious, how would the aniyim know that? So maybe another detail. Why were they poiters like they opened up breaches? They opened up breaches. Maybe that's, I think opening up breaches means is that every Shabbos, the owners, they were very learned, they were holy people, the Anshe Yerichai. If, according to the latter version, if they would notice that the dates that are on the ground are from the machbedos, they would not open up the breaches. They would determine that. The aniyim would never know that. They were not the balabatim. They didn't know the dates. They didn't know the trees, how it was before Shabbos. But every Shabbos morning, if they would see that what's on the ground, according to the latter version, did not come from the machbedos, it only came in akipin, they had the rachmanis. And they felt there's no muktzah issue, and they opened up the pirtzes, and here you have the chacham made a macham. Next. Let's move on. Weiter. The final item that we have in the Mishnah, right, is that the noisten peyah, that they would leave peyah from a vegetable patch. And the chachamim, like we said, they were moiche, because how can you do that when it has to really be tithe? Because there's no chiyuv on peyah. And now we have to explain that. This is the call. How am I to know whether something that I'm growing needs to have peyah left from it or not? This is the rule. Kol shehu, number one, it has to be oichel. Oichel means regular food, not something we'll see that's difficult to eat. Number two, v'nishmar, something that's protected. We are particularly speaking about the time of the harvest, meaning something that's not hefker. Hefker is the opposite of guarded. Number three, only something that v'giduloi min ha'aretz, something that grows from the ground. Next rule is something that when the time of harvesting comes, all of it is ready at the same time. You harvest it at once. We've already learned this. Now, it's figs. What's unique about figs is that every fig is a fig. You don't harvest a tree at once. And the final criterion, it must be something that is capable of being stored for a while. Now you got to learn how to live with these rules in the Mishnah. How long is the while? That we leave for the later generations. In other words, vegetables, b'chlal, have a very little shelf life before refrigerators. So that's going to be, vegetables is not something that machnisa l'kiyum. Other products are considered, they have a longer shelf life. So you have to have 5 rules. Then says the Mishnah Chayiv b'peyah. And now the Gemara teaches the word in the first white line, kol shu oichel. And what does that exclude? Prat l'sfichei satin b'koitza, aftergrowth of what is called satin, soulflower, aftergrowth of koitza of woad is something that is difficult to eat. Not the aftergrowth. If you planted satin and koitza, they're edible. But the aftergrowth, and if you have a ganze field of this aftergrowth, don't have no peyah, no chiyuv peyah. Nishmar, guarded, like we said, prat lehefker. Gedulim in ha'aretz, what is that excluding? Prat lekemeinu pitres, truffles and mushrooms. They'll grow off the carpet if there's enough moisture in the room. Yeah, they grow off the ground, but they're not yoinik from the ground. They're getting their nourishment from the moisture in the air. And if you have a field of kameim and pitrios, no peyah. Likitos and ka'achas, what does that exclude? Prat l'te'enim, a fig crop, no peyah from it. Umachnisa likiyam, this is the kashan anshi yerichai, prat liyerek. So here again, since it doesn't fit all of the rules, and therefore it's exempt from peyah, how can they separate peyah from it? Here's Tainus Nebuch. They gave tzedakah to the poor on Shabbos. It's amazing. They had the best intentions, but they were protested against. So I'm going to no. The only thing from which they took off pay on vegetables was beroshe lefashes askinon. Rashi says the leaves of the turnips. Now like this, turnip bulbs is a yarak, but they are pickled. The minig was to pickle them. Anything that is primarily eaten as pickled item. Why do people pickle things? Not for the krach on the pickle. They pickled it should last long. There was no refrigeration. Oh, so turnips is something that has to be payed. And everyone knew that. And by the way, the Chachamim also left payah from the turnips. But when you would take what about the leaves, the heads, what comes out of the ground from the lefasas? Now, when you would gather these turnips, you would also gather the leaves, not because you wanted the leaves. So that's called umachnisoy lekiyom al yedei davar acher. In other words, you pickled everything together. So the leaves also lasted long, but you didn't care about the leaves. So that is the whole machlokes between Anshe Yericho, Gavaldik, and the Chachamim. Komifligi, Mar Sovar, Anshe Yericho they hold 3 lines from the bottom, that even Machnis Elikim Al Yedei Davar Acher, bottom line is that everything that they harvested, the turnips with the leaves, was Shmei Kiyum. And therefore there's a Chiyuv of Peyam. And you know what? Let the Aniyan take the turnips and the leaves, and they don't have to tithe anything because it's not mechuyev, because there's a chiyuv of payah. It's exempt from Trumas U'Maisos. However, Mar Savar, the Chachamim hold that since the leaves themselves, the tag along is not connected. Here again, connect al pi Chasidus that the Anshe Yericho, that they lived in Yechudei Ilah. That's the pshat. The emes is what's Kayam Hashem. Who are we? We, when we're connected, so God's life is imbued in us. We are the umachnisay lekim al yedei davar acher. So how connected are we? So their connection was greater. And the Chachamim, they protested against the Baruch Shem. They didn't protest; they were objected because it's not shaykh to us, and therefore it's very much connected to these leaves. We are the leaves.
Rabbi, can you just clarify the turnips and the leaves? What was the Anshe Yericho thinking? They were thinking that because you preserve the turnips and you pickle them, therefore they are subject to payah?
Therefore they're subject to payah, even though really no one wanted the leaves per se. But since they tagged along with the turnips, and the turnips has to be payed, so do the leaves.
So they felt that turnips need payah, but the leaves of the turnips don't need payah?
Chachamim held that. The Chachamim held that the leaves don't need payah.
I don't even know, how do you do that? If the leaves are attached to the turnips, then how do you do one and not the other?
Well, I would say that when you harvest them, you would harvest it all together. But when either don't give it to the ani, or tithe it and give it to the ani. What's bothering them? What's bothering you, Danny?
This whole idea that turnips, you have to pickle them, and therefore...
No. Okay, let me word that. You want to be a farmer. Take the leaves off and leave the turnips in the ground. That's what the Chachamim wanted to be done.
So harvest the leaves, tithe them, and then...
Or whatever, yeah. And,
whatever.
And Anshe Yericho, they left the leaves. They felt the leaves are also mechuyev. The leaves are bottled to the product itself. The chiyuv on the turnip goes onto the leaves. Let's hop on a few lines, guys. Tanach Rabbanan. Details about payah on vegetables. Who's the noisnim? Anshe Yericho. They would leave payah, not only the way we explained lalefes, and lalefes again, everyone left it lalefes. That's the way we're learning the Gemara. The leaves of the turnips, they felt is mechuyev and payah, and they will ikrov into cabbage. Again, it's a cabbage, or the leaves of the cabbage fit the Mishnah we learned in Peyah. Rabbi Yossi Omer af lak floit, also to leeks. Now the initial understanding is that the Tanakama has 2 items, and Rabbi Yossi is adding a third. We'll see that's not pshat. Tanya Yidach. Again, initially, if they sefter, the Anshe Yericho would leave payah, not only the way we explained to the leaves of the turnips, lalefes, but according to this version, they would also leave it to leeks. And Abshimon is the one that added kruv. Again, the Havamina is that not only 2 items, but 3 items. Daf Nun Zayin. So says the Gemara, Daf Neima, Tulasa, Tanoi, Hava, are there 3 opinions? Look inside the 3rd Rashi from the top of the Amid. Lema, Tulasa, Tanoi, Hava, Tanach, Hamad, Rabbi Yosi, which is the first brisa that we learned hold, that initially Anshe Richi left it the lefes for Lakruv, but not to the Kafloit. The Tanakam of Rav Shimon, that Shita number 2 holds, that they left it initially only la lefes for Lakfloit and not to the Kruv. And Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Shimon, they hold the same. They hold, from the beginning, they would leave payah to the leaves of all 3, but, says the Gemara, loy, nisht, azay lemrim pshat. Today, Tanoi Havim, there are only 2 shitos. The Tanakama de Rabbi Shimon, Hainu Rabbi Yosi, and the Tanakama de Rabbi Yosi, Hainu Rabbi Shimon. In other words, in the first brisa, when Rabbi Yosi says, Af lak floyd, he's taking out the Kruv. There's only 2 sheets. Everyone knows that they left payah to the leaves of lefes and kruv, or to lefes and lakfoit. And my af, the af goes on the first, not 2, but 3. No, when it says that Rabbi Yosi says af lakfloit, it means not only to lefes, but to kafloit as well, but not to kruv. So bottom line is that the answer that we gave is not only about turnips, but you have another 2 items, which is cabbage and leeks. One of those 2 was also an item that the Anshe Yerichai felt that you have to leave payah, to which the Chachamim argued, and they made a macha, because Lishita Sam, the Aniyim would take it, and they would not separate Trumas or Maises, and we were being marshal them in doing so. God willing to be continued. Tomorrow we're learning the last daf of Makim Shunahagu. Guys, we are already halfway through the Masechta, but from Perik Chamishi until, but not included the last chapter, for those of us that miss Kachim, so thank God we're back to Kachim. It's pure Kachim, to the point that one of the reasons that Masechtas Pesachim is not called Masechtas Pesach, Masechtas Sukkah, not Sukkos, Masechtas Yuma or Yoima, not Yoimayim. Here it's Lashon Abim because it used to be 2 Masechtas. One was about Chametz Matzah and then v'chule, and one was about Korban Pesach, and that will be not tomorrow. So tomorrow will be the last day of the first Masechta, sure. And then God willing we'll continue in the second chapter, the second Sefer of Pesach.
Thanks for the warning.
Can't wait.
No.